On behalf of the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana, thank you for joining us for this virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival presentation. This program is Patriarchy, Toxic Masculinity, and the Queer Young Adult Experience with Lev Rosen and Adam Sass. Lev Rosen writes books for people of all ages, most recently Camp, which was a Best Book of the Year from Forbes, Elle, and The Today Show, amongst others, and is a Lambda finalist and American Library Association Rainbow List Top 10. His next book, Lavender House, will be released fall of 2022. He lives in New York City with his husband and a very small cat. You can find him online at levacrosen.com and at levacrosen. Adam Sass began writing books in Sharpie on the backs of Starbucks pastry bags. He's sorry it distracted him from making your latte. His debut, Surrender Your Sons, was featured in Teen Vogue and Savage Lovecast, named a Best Book of the Year by Kirkus, and won the Gold Medal for YA Fiction at the IPPY Awards. The 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers is his forthcoming second novel. He lives with his husband and dachshunds. This program is recommended for ages 14 and up. Ladies and gentlemen, Lev Rosen and Adam Sass.
Hi. Have we given it a beat yet?
We gave it a beat, Lev. Well, hello. We're going to talk about do you want to talk about toxic masculinity?
I mean, that's what they told us to talk about.
Why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about that. It's bad. It's bad. Thank you for coming.
Well, yeah, we've done that. So let's move on.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I mean, toxic masculinity, in many forms, within the queer community, even, which readers of your fabulous book Camp would know very much about. In Camp, you explored that through your main character. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you read Camp, and should we, let's do the thing where we talk about our books a little. We should do that.
Oh, I figured this was an only our books conversation.
Yeah, no.
We are talking about this issue.
I mean, yeah.
No, okay, so the
summary, the pitch,
yes,
the elevator pitch is that
haven't read it. Yeah,
I haven't done this in a while. Camp takes place at an LGBTQIA plus summer camp where Randall, who normally goes by Randy, has been going for 4 years. And for 4 years, he has been in love with Hudson Aronson Lim. And this year, he is going to win Hudson's heart. He is sure of it. Hudson has no idea he exists, but Randy is a theater kid. Oh, and Hudson, see, I'm screwing up already. Hudson is mask for mask, which means he considers himself very masculine and is only interested in men who he also considers masculine. And Randy is not that, with the nail polish and the unicorn sheets and all that, but he is a theater kid. So what he does is he comes up with this brilliant, terrible, terrible plan where he decides to butch himself up and calls himself Dell, and he's going to win Hudson's heart by essentially pretending to be this butch guy. And of course, that is a terrible idea. It's just the worst idea. I love characters who just go full throttle on a bad idea.
Oh, listen, Mask for Mask, your original title.
Yes,
I don't know if that's public knowledge. Right. Right. It was very Galaxy branded, lived it. RIP that title. But what I really liked about this is it was giving me Mean Girls, because it was where it's like Randall goes in thinking he has all this agency over his dumb plan, where he's going to be like, I'm going to come in and I'm in charge of the performance that I am doing. This is just to get first of all, he's gaslighting this guy kind of.
I know.
I mean, first of all, I'm going to present
it's
very bad. It's very bad. So he's like, first of all, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to present this completely fake persona. Get the guy nefariously for, toxic reasons. And then it's just all going to work out. And then I will reveal who I am. And then but he goes in thinking much like Katie in Mean Girls, goes in thinking, I'm going to do this thing and I've got all this agency. And then like very like much there is a moment where it's like, oh, you're not pretending it. Like you are actually kind of exhibiting some of these thoughts and feelings.
His friends who the whole time have been like, this is a terrible idea,
Right.
confront him on that at some point.
Right.
And yeah, no, I it's funny. I think of it as having similarities to like a lot of teen movies, like you know, like
Subterfuge,
that kind of vibes, and you know, just any sort of makeover thing. And I felt like it was very, and of course the inspiration for me is like, you know, Down with Love, and also the old Rock Hudson, Doris Day movies, which I love, where like he essentially is like, I'm a nerd now because you hated diversity, and like it's all terrible, but I wanted to come
Shakespeare,
up with
really
a version of that one. It is Shakespeare. Everything's Shakespeare in the end.
It's all Shakespeare. No, and so what I really liked about What About Camp was bringing up, which we don't often talk about in, you know, because again, you know, getting a full spectrum of queerness within any medium is you know, it's a struggle. And so we're just starting to tell maybe like, you know, some more different stories now. And I think what I liked about this so much is it really brings in that like, no, you can be out and queer and femme even, and that, but like you can still have toxic masculinity within you that you have to deal with.
And I also think like when he plays at being this butch dude, he, you know, he takes from that. Like he becomes very much a leader in that role, which he ends up liking, and he brings back to the theater. Spoiler. But what I love, honestly, is there are lots of reviews that I've seen where it's like, I went into this thinking this is going to be terrible because I hate this idea. I hate what he's doing, but like it ends up being so nicely done because we learn. And you know, I hate Hudson too, because Hudson, you know, is this guy who only wants butch guy, but like we end up learning so much about them and their own internalized homophobia, which is a form of toxic masculinity, and it become, yeah, I love those reviews where it's like, I thought I was going to hate this and I loved it.
Right. I mean, that is a pet peeve though, of the sort of media literacy we are begging people to have a little bit more of, where it's like, well, you could assume that the little brown young readers did not go out and publish a book saying all gay kids should be masculine, presenting it all time. Well, that maybe that there is a conceit within this that is part of the lesson.
Possibly. I mean, you know, I understand not trusting publishers, but
well, we should always trust but verify. Yeah.
But on the flip side, though, I definitely have seen negative reviews where they're like, this book is saying that all gay guys have to be femme. And that is not true. And I'm like, hey, Faye, honey, you did not get this book at all. But they'll get it eventually. I want to talk about,
they will,
Surrender Your Sons, where the toxic masculinity, I feel like, is less internalized and more externalized. So
so Surrender Your Sons is my book. It is it follows Connor Major, who's a kind of a punk queer teen who's very mouthy, but you know, comes in a really religious home, and you know, so it is kind of in that bubble where you're out, you can be out, but like maybe not out to everybody, or like there's all these conditions and strings attached to you, where you're really sort of being a spy within your own home. Sure, it's like, so in this book, he is taken to an island, which is the home to Nightlight, a conversion therapy camp that is full of all sorts of sinister people, and you know, filled with other queer teens that Connor is not quite sure if he can trust or not, who's sort of really, you know, in the system, who can he confide in, who is, you know, who is pretending to be part of the, you know, going along with all of these, you know, workshops, you know, because there's masculinity and femininity workshops there, you know, there's very, very rigid gender roles. They have a boys cabin and a girls cabin. There's a trans boy who's forced to stay in the girls cabin. There is you know, the queer girls are forced to clean house and play house and all of these things, you know, and it's a place designed to take all of these gender roles that are out there in the world and enforce them to physical extremes on these kids. So
Mhm.
Connor is dropped into this world, and right away he wants to get out. He's like, well, obviously right away he's trying to get out, and so he goes through many different plans. First, it's I'll fake it for a week and get out of here and be a model camper, and then they'll all be fooled, and then I'll get to go home. And that doesn't work out that way. Then he thinks escape is the way, but then he realizes that if he escapes, he's leaving a dozen poor souls behind. And so the story really becomes about him rallying these other campers together to not just escape together, but to unearth the sort of decades of dark secrets that this camp has been sitting on and expose them and get them shut down for good. So really in Surrender Your Sons, we're exploring a lot of really, really toxic gender roles, but also, within Connor himself, you're seeing how as a queer teen who, I know myself at that age, didn't have quite a handle on my whole identity yet. Not just my queerness, but also like how gay I talked, or how how I presented myself, how I dressed. Like, I mean, there was a bit of that was that was having to be, Connor has to exist in this very small religious Midwest MAGA town. And so there is a little bit of survival there where he has to sort of adopt these things and sort of live in it without, really kind of knowing what his, whole identity is about. So writing this book was, it was a dark book, but it was very rewarding because me at my not teenage getting to kind of re-explore a lot of stuff that I thought I had kind of like left in the past, and really go, oh, okay, this is why I behaved this way in high school, and this is why I didn't come out until college, and really unpacking a lot of those things. And it really always has to do not necessarily with who you're dating. I think a lot of it does depend on like how you are presenting yourself to the
Yeah, I
world, and
think
kind
a
of
lot of it,
yeah.
I mean, in high school, I remember like, when I write camp, when I wrote Jack of Hearts, I was writing it very much for like teen Lev. And in high school, I've been out, since high school, first year of high school. I was president of the Gay Straight Alliance. I was all that. And I went to a super liberal high school in New York City. So like I had, best possible sort of scenario there.
Right.
And I still ended up sort of thinking a lot like Hudson does, which is, again, spoilers, where he sort of says, I feel like being a stereotype is, an evidence of weak will. Being a flaming queen, being all that, being femme, that indicates that you are giving in to what straight people think you should be. And
Right.
but really it's like what he doesn't get is it's really the flip. And I think about this a lot. I was thinking about toxic masculinity, and I was talking to someone the other day, and I'm like, it's not even just masculinity, like it's the whole fucking, I don't know if we're allowed to swear, but it's the whole patriarchy. And
Yeah.
like the patriarchy itself that tells you this is masculine, this is feminine, and the more you adhere to those rules based on the sex you were assigned at birth, is the more that you are like acceptable and good in a society. You get points, and that is the big issue. And I was talking to a friend who's ace, and they were going on about how they didn't, they never entirely understood situations in the locker room, or was talking to friends where they heard, oh, well, boys just always want sex, and like, so I give it to them, stuff like that. And I was like, well, that's because, you're queer. You immediately are put in a situation where you get to step outside that toxic patriarchy and start like dismantling it. And not everyone chooses that, though, because that realization that you are outside the patriarchy, that you do not fit in because of this one thing, means that like you already fail, you instant fail. And some people try to make up for it by becoming like, you know, getting as many points the other way as possible by conforming to these gender roles while still being queer. And I think that when you come out, right, as a teenager, doesn't it sort of feel that way? I mean, I don't think as much today, thank God, but
I think it does, because in general, you know, I've noticed even, you know, during the pandemic, I kind of moved closer to my parents for a year, and I had a great coming out. They were great, but like even then, noticing how, you know, coming out queer, it starts to give you that muscle to flex, to go, you know, I'm gonna say this uncomfortable information that's gonna change certain dynamics within the home for good or for bad, you know, and then but then that muscle is gonna get used a lot for various other non-LGBTQ related things. Like, I mean, and that's something where I've noticed that, like, I noticed that in my brother, who is straight, you know, never really had. So I noticed, like, for him, a lot of these kind of similar conversations with my parents were very difficult for him, because, you know, again, just by nature of like, and that is kind of a gift, unintentionally, of being queer, and if you do come out, is that you do start to get kind of used to, you're familiar with, I'm gonna say something and it's really, you know, and I'm doing this for me and it's not about you, and then kind of having that sort of separation and sort of, for lack of a better term, breaking bad news to people regularly. Not that it's bad news, but, you know, like, you kind of have this thing where in that moment you're like, I'm going to say something and I don't really know if this is going to go over well or not. Because again, a lot of people, you know, myself, I never heard my parents saying anything homophobic over the years, but it was still nerve-wracking to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because you don't know if it's going to go good or bad, and you don't know if they're going to start treating you like a different person. And so a lot of that, like you said, you know, once you step outside of that birdcage, it is, you know, that is a step outside. Some people, you know, step a little bit outside, some people step very outside. And I think that's something where, you know, going back to within my own life, re-examining something like, it's spooky season, and I just watched on Freaky for the first time, which you haven't seen. It's wonderful, but there's like a gay best friend character in that, and they lean really, really hard kind of into, you know, like these sort of like archetypes, and it's very self-aware. It's very breaking the fourth wall, because it's supposed to be like a horror movie about horror movies. And in this, you know, you have like queer actor, queer writer, queer director, and then the character himself is what you would maybe consider very stereotypical. And then it was my roommate, my husband, and I were watching it, and we all had very different emotional responses to this character, where some people, like, right away were like, you're like, oh my God, you know, this seems, you know, like they're kind of cracking these, what you would consider stereotypical jokes up front. And you were maybe concerned about, is this going to be very lived in? Is this going to be the thing that I've been seeing for 30 years, these sort of characters?
Is it going to be lazy?
Is it going to be lazy? Is it sort of like, is this sort of like a you know, a straight person's view of it? Like, you're like quickly IMDbing, like, is the person who wrote this script gay or not? But, you know, but I think that kind of like, whether or not that was the point, you know, on their end, like, it's a wonderful performance, and it's extremely well written and very lived in. But, you know, I had my own responses to it, where I was like, oh, we don't talk like that. Like, I just was like, wait a minute. And I'm like, however old I am, and being like, you know, you know, but sometimes, you know, we do talk like that. So I think a lot of it is like you said, with your characters, Randall and Hudson, where it's like, you know, I think throughout that book, both of them kind of learned to sort of, it's really, I think, about, through the fog of toxic masculinity, really finding your true voice and your true identity, whatever, speaking with that authenticity. And for a lot of us, it's not going to be math, you know, like, for, you know, neither for Hudson or Randall it isn't. So,
yeah, I think for a lot of queer people too, like, and this sort of gets to what you're just saying about the horror movie too. when you come out, if you're like one of just a handful of queer kids in your school, or the only one in your friend group, you become the gay one. Like you don't get to have another identity. And obviously, you know, other minorities experience this from the get-go. But if you're the only one, you become that one. You represent everything. And you have all the sort of assumptions about the sort of person you are thrust upon you. And sometimes you feel a need to meet expectations to be liked. Like I remember in high school, again, very liberal high school, but at some point, like Vogue or not Teen Vogue, like, or Elle, something, had a whole article on like the gay best friend. And like, you know, how to like, and it said, you know, it was talking about gay people like we were purses. And immediately after that article came out, and I didn't read Elle or anything, I found about it because this started happening. All of a sudden, all these girls I never talked to wanted to be my friend. And it's because I was like the only out guy in my grade.
Right.
And they were suddenly like, oh my God, we should go shoe shopping. And I was like, I am not a shoe person. Please don't make me go shoe shopping. I don't want that.
And I think it is a little bit about these boxes, because I think that kind of going back to what I was saying about being nervous to talk to your parents, whether or not they've been super opening or accepting, you know, of other queer people that you've observed, it's still nerve-wracking, because I think for a lot of us, we do, regardless of people's perceptions, still want to remain us. Mm-hmm. Like we inside know these are my likes, these are my dislikes. And a lot of times they do hew, you know, to a lot of like kind of a lot of what most gay people like or whatever. There is sort of a thing, but like, you know, like you with shoes, like I'm like, I don't know pop music. I don't stan anybody. Like I would never defend any of them for any reason. I would just, I'm not going to be in somebody's replies going, don't say that about her. You don't understand what she's going through. Like, you know, except for Brittany. But I think like for that, it's like, you know, there, and it's like, and then, but you will catch me on Twitter, like talking really well about James Bond movies, but in a queer POV sense, you know? So I think a lot of that is a lot of it. I think everybody's very protective over their internal identity, and no one, you know, having any say or dominion over that. And so I think a lot of people, whether like, you know, who are queer, if they, you know, if a queer guy grows up really loving, you know, sports, might think he's got to talk a certain way and act a certain way and still be into sports. Or if he's got to like choose this other, you know, box, if he's got to abandon sports or abandon, you know, how he would maybe more naturally speak. I come from a theater background, so I'm always very like aware of like, your natural voice is right here in your chest. What does that sound like? Is it higher or lower? It's not the voice you're presenting to everybody. But yeah, I think that's something where it's a lifelong discussion internally and with other people. But I think really, you know, and we're seeing this, you know, and again, there's just so much toxicity. Must get rid of toxic in the community. There's a lot of toxic gays in the communities. So and it usually revolves around this, and it usually will revolve around you know, up until Drag Race was a big thing, a big popular thing. It was, you would always find somebody who would be like, oh, I wouldn't, if you do drag, I would never date you. Or and even still, while the show is popular, it's taken up until now to get you know trans queens on the show, to get a AFAB queen on the show, just brand new right now, you know, where there's a whole lot of like, oh, we're still boxing everyone, we're still saying, oh, you can do this, this is us and this is not you. And so I think that's, you know, that's something where I'm glad that we are all talking about this and not exempting ourselves en masse from this problem, something that we are very much lives within all of us, and we all must be consistently talking against. I want to switch directions real quick, because also your and mine's book have a lot in common, not just the sort of bunch of queers in a camp thing, but also
I just want to say what you were talking about, and you just said it again. the idea of all of us confronting it together. Both our books do that. Like it's both about communities sort of coming together to take care of stuff. So yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's a community building. It's like you're not going to get out. In my book, Connor is a cis white gay boy, but he could on his own take the boat and leave and save himself, but he would be leaving behind an entire community to suffer, which is really how I feel about the community as it currently is in the United States. So, and it really becomes about, it is his responsibility as someone who has only been in this camp for a short period, and has the energy and the organizational power to get everybody out of there. And it kind of comes down to, that is your responsibility to do that. You are not legally, he's not legally obligated, but it is, I think I do believe in a moral duty. And I do believe
with the most privilege within
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so I think there are several in the queer community, I think there are many moral obligations that we are always put to, and a lot of us are failing on. So gotta fix that. So both of our books have on the page sex scenes, do they not? I suppose they do. Spoiler for both of us. So I mean, that's another thing where I wanted to talk about how you felt writing queer on the page sex, because in a YA book, which is for teens, which is for people under the age of 18. So I think it's been a hot button issue for a long time about getting that rep, getting that out there. I'll start with myself because it's something that emotionally I constantly have. I just did it in my new book. It's always a very big deal the day I write that scene. It's always like I have to prepare myself. I have to do a lot of meditation. I have to do a lot because it's all of my internalized crap comes out. I unpack everything that day, and I came out a lot later. I came out at 20, and for me, I was really repressed in high school. So I mean, I have a lot of internalized shame, and so whenever I write these scenes, I'm constantly plagued with like, just cut to black. What is wrong with you? Why are you writing this? It's the voices in my head are very loud during that time. But I'm like, well, this is in my second book, I'm like, well, this is a romantic comedy, and this is an important part of we can't just not like, it's important. Yeah. It's important part of the thing. And also in general, with my adult brain, I am very aware of like, there is no there's hardly any sex education for straight people, much less, I say frequently, but it's like, we can't even tell our kids about the birds and the bees. We can't tell them about the bees and the bees. So it's hard to get to this. I just got to think about that for a second. Yeah. But it's very difficult to, get out there sort of to queer kids, like, here's how healthy boundaries are. Here's what you should be, here's how you should be thinking about it. Here's the unique things to your situation that you're going to come up against. Here's here's the different way. If this is something that you're going to be doing, here's ways to protect yourself. Here's way to protect your emotions. Here's, you might feel weird after, and here's why, and kind of going through all of that, because they're not telling it in schools. You're not hearing it from your parents, most likely, and you're certainly not going to see it in on TV and movies. So you really, I feel like there's so few outlets really showing that.
Well, where I think queer teens see it is porn.
I mean, but then that's like you.
Yeah, and that's total fantasy.
My God.
And they end up thinking that that's what real sex is, and that ends up being. I mean, there was a whole article, and I loved years ago in the New York Times Magazine about these folks. I think they were all women. It doesn't matter. About these people who went around teaching porn literacy to teens and tweens too, even younger, because the statistics are something like by 12, over 60% of men have seen pornography. And by 16, it becomes like 90, and women become like 70%. So like everyone has seen porn. And they used to go around and they used to essentially teach porn literacy and like be like, this is fantasy. And they would ask questions, and they were sort of learning about like what kids are learning from porn. And I remember there's one moment where they're talking to a 13-year-old boy, 12 or 13, 14, I don't remember. And they ask him, you know, if you were having sex with a woman, would you also try anal? And he goes, yeah. And they go, would you tell her before? And he goes, no, why would I need to do that? All the girls in porn love it. And like that's the sort of education that all these kids are getting, because we don't really have great sex ed in this country. And so they end up with like really screwed up ideas about you know, consent. That's the big one. But then also the way things work, especially queer kids, because you know, in porn, very seldom do you see the condom go on, the lubrication beforehand, how you're getting the lube in there, all of that.
And that's something where in my second upcoming book, like it does come up where, you know, in their first encounter, he just goes, you know, my main character is more inexperienced, and then his boyfriend is more experienced, and he just says, listen, the full intercourse thing doesn't have to be part of this, and most likely you won't be super ready for it on the first time. It takes a lot of warm up. It takes that your body needs to be trained. There's a whole bunch of stuff like it, and it's again, there's also kind of removing that feeling of like, in order to have sex with somebody you care about, it has to be this whole thing, or it's nothing, or you didn't do it. And it's like, no, it's all, it comes in many different forms, and there's many different ways, and for a lot of people, it's not even part of it. You know, there's a lot that kind of goes into that, and I think kind of giving that magic wand of this is okay or normal can be really helpful, especially for young people, because again, like you said, everybody's learning it from porn, if they're learning about it at all, and it's all fantasy. There's practically no consent. There's practically no you know, condom talk. And then in my second book, we bring up PrEP. So it's like, yeah, we should all be talking about these sorts of things that should be just very, very normal parts of, you know, society. But I think we get and I think how this relates to toxic masculinity is it relates all to, you know, this discomfort. And I think, you know, I think with MM, a lot of, you know, toxic masculine people like have that discomfort with, you know, with like the penetrative situations. Like it's all very like I mean, we talk about, you know, we on gay Twitter, it's always like some top or bottom joke of the day. But we all have a good laugh. But it does kind of turn into this, it's all sort of shades of everybody's sort of toxic upbringing of like, well, the person who's getting penetrated is the more femme presenting one, and or they're, you know, or they're, oh, you act a certain way, you're definitely the one who's about, like, it's this whole kind of thing, and you see it kind of get regurgitated. I say it constantly, and you know, I think there's a way to kind of do it and, you know, take the piss out of it by making a joke, while still kind of being like, yeah, I have weird baggage about it, you know, working on like it.
A lot of the jokes work only for queer people. Like if I see straight people telling the jokes about tops and bottoms, I suddenly get really uncomfortable, because like you don't have the years of self-reflection and everything that's going on there. But like, yeah,
how dare you say that about Bill Maher?
I know. I mean, I did so much of this in Jack of Hearts and Other Parts, which was my first YA before camp. And you know, that book is all about sex ed. That book is literally has a sex ed column in it, and it, you know, has a whole diatribe about how there's one, I believe it opens with him smoking in the bathroom, listening through the vent to girls in the girls' bathroom talking about his sex life. And it opens with them just being like, he has to be the bottom. because I'm doing a voice here, a terrible voice. He has to be the bottom because he's so femme, and you know, he's such a queen, and you know, and one of them ends up writing him later, being like, "What do you do when there's two bottoms?" And he like just goes. It's like such an angry rant of a letter, and I felt so good writing it. I'm not gonna lie. The writing that was like so much fun, and it just goes on about like, you know, your heteronormative assumptions, this, that, you know, this is all just forms of homophobia, and you don't get to ask these things. Like, and then if there are any queer people reading, like da da da. But this whole idea that sex, and I think sex, you're right, sex is inherently linked to toxic masculinity because we have these gender roles associated with it, because we have all this stuff associated with what makes sex superior. And again, it's this ranking, it's this patriarchal ranking. Like, so.
Well, I mean, when it is discussed in school, it's discussed as a procreative act. And I think even, I think it was on Dan Savage's show where he was talking about even his own, he said, he's a sex columnist, and he's like, even I messed up the sex talk with my son because I mentioned it. I talked about it only in procreative terms. I never discussed like 90% of the sex you might be having is going to be not procreative. You know, like it's like there are other functions for it, and then there are other sort of things in it. But when we only discuss it in these terms, it does become patriarchal, and it does become, you know, toxic masculinity, because it favors, you know, it favors the man many times. And so it all kind of talks, it's a power dynamic, and it's all things bad, and it's bad. We should get rid of it. I think we should get rid of toxic masculinity.
I mean, I think so too. That's a great idea. I'm glad we've solved it.
We've solved it. But I think your point is that like we're being raised in this society, no one is completely 100% exempt.
No one escapes.
Exactly. You know, with all of us, you know, have to kind of have some conversation internally with that at some point. Yeah. And I think the more open you are to admitting that to yourself is the best first step to sort of confronting that. I think the more you're closed off and going, you know, well, not me, you know, I kind of have the whole thing on lock. I kind of understand it, and I've never had a toxic thought in my life. I think that's kind of your first step away towards like never, you know, addressing any of this stuff online, which, you know,
I think the moment you start being like, well, this is only a problem for those people.
Right.
Like, it's not really a problem because it's not a problem for me, because thus far I have not felt penalized in any way, etc. Then that is the issue.
Or you've been victimized by toxic masculinity, because like, you know, myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I have the following wounds from toxic masculinity. So therefore that's for Chad to work on me. But I think, you know, that's when you get into when you see the worst of Twitter, when you see people complaining about Twitter, usually it's someone who is claiming a very high moral high ground, that is unimpeachable. That's usually when I think you find the worst tweets, is where you have somebody who was like, absolutely no. I've never had a you know, never had a racist thought in my life. Never had a
other people's perspectives. Yeah.
Right. I think kind of the more we kind of speak from this place of humility and sort of self-reflection, the better.
Yeah, and the more we like just sort of talk and figure stuff out and get kids education, that is what's gonna hopefully, you know, I don't want to be like, oh, Gen Z, they're gonna save us all, because I think that's wildly unfair. But like, I look at, you know, in Texas, in the town where they tried to ban Jack of Hearts in other parts, where you know, which is so funny to me, because even though it is a sex ed book, there are no on the page sex scenes. And that was a very conscious decision. It had to do with the character and like taking control of his own sexual narrative. But all there is sort of discussions of sex. And that's the one they want to ban, not Camp, which has the actual sex scene. And that is because they don't like the idea of these kids getting sexual information, of getting sort of, of being empowered in any way. They don't want kids empowered. And this is the same town where right now, even though they have not successfully banned the book, because there's like a great liberal contingent really fighting it and some really great librarians out there. This is the town where now the school had a new principal who interviewed the student members of the Gay Straight Alliance, pulled them out of class and talked to them for 45 minutes, took down all pride anything from the whole school because it's political, and then put both openly queer teachers on leave. And the kids staged a walkout, the whole like school. It was hundreds of kids. And I am so proud of them for that and so thrilled to them for that. But they should not have to be doing that. That is what like upsets me so much. Like this should not be on kids. And yet we are in a situation where adults just can't seem to get it together enough. And like not all adults, and certainly we're trying and they're parts of the country, et cetera, but like, oh boy, guys.
It sucks because again, like it's like we're all fighting so many battles on so many fronts. And the problem really comes down to, that's why I'm just like, it's just, not to turn this into like, here's what we need, Washington, here's what we got to do. But you go up there and you tell Kirsten Sinema. But no, I mean, I think right now what we're kind of seeing and dealing with is the effects of decades of voter suppression by the will of the people consistently not being reflected. And so this sort of morphed version of this is the will of the people. And it's like, no, it's the will of a very select few people being imposed violently on us. And so it all kind of trickles downhill because I mean, Texas, I'm in California. Demographically, California is not far from Texas. There's blue dots and red surroundings, and that's the country, gang. That's every state. So again, I think and I'll make a Texas joke here and there, but again, you'll hear some of the worst, some terrible hate crimes that come out of California, and there's no one's exempt. I think what it comes down to is the way California's laws are set up allows the greater plurality of voters to kind of be in charge of things. And I think in Texas, things have been so gerrymandered and so voter suppressed for so long, and it's only getting worse, that is why it's become such a red state and becomes there's such a public identity of Texas as this just lawless root and tootin' state where it's like, it's becoming increasingly like, like I'm going to a wedding there in March in Austin. So, but I'm like, even then I'm just like, God, do I even want to like step foot? But that's like kind of the thought process, is because it's seeped in so much. You sort of start thinking of things in terms of that.
Whenever I tell this story, I inevitably get someone commenting, well, it's Texas, what do you expect? And I always have to be like, well, Texas is actually like a really blue state. It's just been deeply gerrymandered. And there's this whole group there fighting for these kids. And like, we can't paint that with a brush and just sort of disregard it. Like I did a book list roundtable on romance recently. And the last question, it was me and some other romance. The last question was, does love conquer all? And everyone else is like, yes. And it was very sweet and they had the reasons. And I was like, you know what? I'd love to believe it does. And then like in a fair world, sure, love will conquer all, love will fix things. But what we all have to do now is call our reps. Like that is what it comes down to.
I mean, that's the thing, the sort of tireless sort of, because again, we see what, even now with this gridlock, we're saying that's us having 50% of the Senate, and even still, it's like murder getting anything done. But I think that this really kind of comes down to is, and we kind of go into, you want to really talk about toxic masculinity, in government. is what is happening in Texas right now with the 6-week abortion ban, and and it's beyond heinous. So I think if you're thinking of things, and I've seen this too, where you say, oh, what's Texas? What do you blah blah, or I won't be shooting my movie in Texas because of the following reasons or whatever. But it's like, this is only coming 10 months after an election where we all were like, thank you, Georgia. Oh my God, you saved us, Georgia. Like, and it's like, and then this whole narrative begins again, where we think like, oh, there's good states and bad, and it's like, I can see like being like, this state is good to live in because the way the laws have currently been set up makes it more safe for me, my family. But this whole idea that like a different kind of person lives there.
There are terrible people right down the street from me.
Right.
I live in
like, right. And so, and I'm not saying like it's probably, it appears in different ways. Probably in sort of blue states, the toxic masculinity appears in a much more friendly way. Just like in a blue state, maybe the racism appears in a much more palatable way.
That's what I always talked about with Jack of Hearts, because it takes place in this liberal private high school like I went to, and the homophobia that he experiences isn't calling him the F word and telling him to go,
right.
People stereotyping and the stuff we were talking about before. It's this very nice homophobia. I don't mind gay people. I love gay marriage. I just think they're a bit in your face. That's the kind of stuff.
Right. It's that, or it's like, or I don't want that for my kid, or be gay, marry a man, just don't you drag.
All of that.
All of that. So yeah, and I think that's kind of where we're at. And it's and I can't believe you've had to go through this thing where your book getting banned. My God. The dream.
It's fine, but I worry about the kids.
Of course, because it is just, because then you go to like, well, if this is getting banned, what has already been banned that hasn't made the noise?
Yeah, well, it's funny. They started out because the library did a teen display for Pride. Right. And originally they protested the whole thing, but then they picked mine specifically. I'm so special, to use as an example. And like, clearly they were trying to ban this one, and then they try to ban the next one based on the same criteria. And now they're getting state senators involved. It's a whole thing. But no, this is what, and the fact that it had to get banned, though, I think is actually a good sign, because the thing that queer books sort of put up with more, and this gets back to the sort of liberal homophobia, is the soft banning. So you have a school librarian who just doesn't buy the book because, oh gosh, this is just going to cause so much drama. I don't want to cause drama. That'll make my life harder. I might get fired, etc. So I'm just not going to put any queer books on my shelves. And, I'm not saying that's a lot of librarians. I love librarians. I'm married to a librarian. So I believe there are a lot of good librarians in the world, but there are a lot who just don't want to deal with the drama that a queer book on the shelf will cause. And that is so much more insidious, and on some levels worse, because it's, you don't see it. It's harder to fight.
Well, because librarians on Twitter will be, we'll kind of, we'll say the situation, which is just the people who want those books banned call and bother the librarian and go to the superiors like 50 times more than the ones who are like, yeah, it should be there. So that's like kind of like, that's a similar call your reps thing, where it's just like, it's annoying. You need to spend half your day on the phone saying, thank you for having the book. Like, you have to do that, or saying, don't you dare get rid of that, and making yourself heard, because the people who are against that, people are going to try to impose their will. They got nothing apparently but time to get on the phone and bother and go to the Senate and go to the this and and it's their whole job. Is
all the
that
school meetings, everything,
right? Who goes on to Goodreads and 1-stars all the queer titles. Not having read it. My next book, like, not out for another year. got a bunch of one
Just
stars.
don't look at the star ratings
Right.
on Goodreads ever, anyone. If you
No.
know a reviewer, read the reviews, but don't
Right.
care about the stars. They're meaningless.
Right. Yeah, Goodreads is like Pitchfork to me, where I'm just
I
like,
think it is
it's
Rotten Tomatoes. Like
it's yeah, it is where it's just like it's review
or
bombing.
Yelp.
Yeah, where it's like the people who review stuff on Yelp, it's just like, well, these are just a bunch of people who are malcontents and just
Yeah, a waiter was mean to me once, therefore this whole restaurant should burn.
Right.
Like these are just people who, you know, and it's fine if a book isn't for you. Not every book is going to be for every person. And attempting to write that book would be such a boring book.
But again, it exposes many implicit biases.
Yeah.
That by just going, I love it this way. Yep.
On Goodreads, I really only trust like fully written reviews that explain why a person felt the way they did by people who like I trust. And that is really the only way I think you can use Goodreads responsibly.
Yeah. Exactly. But as an author, we are never on there, correct? If only to just get our Goodreads ad link and then be out of there.
I don't even, we have ad links. I don't know how to do that.
I don't even know. I know. Well, again, like because
I look up books when like I look up other books. I never look up my book.
I know. I try to see. This is the thing. I was doing so well, and I had put Goodreads out of my life because Surrender Your Sons came out over a year ago. So I was like, okay, it's out of my life. I don't gotta do anything. And then my next book, 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers, is coming out next fall. And we're starting early, folks. They started putting out like 2022 most anticipated lists. Mm-hmm. And you go on there and vote for stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta like ended this wave of like dissociations left over me because I was like, oh God, I have to start again and I have to get people to push the button. And it just was like, oh, I can't even do this. I can't even.
It's all popularity contest stuff. I don't pay any attention to that.
Right. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So that's kind of my thing. It has nothing to do with toxic masculinity. It's my own baggage that I just brought to this thing. I'm like, and that's really like not liking my book is a toxic masculinity problem.
Yeah, it's true. Not liking our book on Goodreads, not giving our books 5 stars on Goodreads is toxic masculinity. So you
have to rate us 5 stars because you have to counteract all the 1 stars from bigots.
Yeah, it's homophobia otherwise.
It's the equity that we deserve. All right. So toxic masculinity, final thoughts.
Well, I want to know, does toxic masculinity feature in your forthcoming book that you've been mentioning, but maybe want to say the whole title of and describe a little?
Yes, the 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers is coming out next fall from Viking, and it follows an Instagram sketch artist who has all of his relationships. These 99 boyfriends are all in his head, as per usual for many queer youth, where it's just see somebody and you're not quite sure if they're queer or if they're like interested or whatever, and so you just sort of don't do the vulnerable thing. You just kind of keep it there, and he creates these big fantasy worlds in his head because in those worlds he has agency. In those worlds he has all his needs met, and we really meet him at this juncture where he has had 99 of these imaginary relationships, and they are no longer satisfying. He's about to be a senior. All of his friends have been dating for years and years, and he really, really wants that for himself. And so he decides that boy 100, the next person he sees and feels inspired to sketch, is going to be the boy he asks out. And in sort of a Cinderella modern twist, he really hits it off with this guy, and they're about to tell each other their names, and then they get separated on a train, and they don't know who each other are and where to find each other. So Micah sets out on this big epic quest around Chicago, where he lives, to find boy 100 and to take that fantasy into reality. So it's a rom-com. It's really, really it's my little YA Nora Ephron movie, which I'm like determined, because my favorite rom-coms are more heavy on the calm. So that's what you're gonna get with this. It's still very romantic, but you're gonna get a lot of like, there's gonna be a teen Carrie Fisher character. But I think it's just gonna be a lot of fun. And I spent the pandemic writing, and I had so much fun writing something that was so there's twists and turns, and there's lots of drama and conflama, but it's definitely a more hopeful, positive book than Surrender Your Son, which was about unpacking trauma. And in this one, there is toxic masculinity, I suppose, to unpack, because not that Micah necessarily is exhibiting a lot of that, but he has a very, very clear idea in his head of who this perfect first boyfriend is, who is boy 100. I think that's something that we as gays can do sometimes, is you have a very hyper idealized person in your head, because our only touch points are fantasies. They're fairy tales, they're Disney movies, they're other rom-com movies. It's all fiction. So kind of like our porn discussion earlier, where it's like there's fantasy, it's all idealized, it's all he's going to be this certain way, and he's going to look a certain way, and he's going to like the same things I like, and he's going to do this and this and that. And like I think a lot of times, a lot of gays for first boyfriends, if they come to it with that mindset, it's a very underwhelming relationship for them, because they're bringing a lot of artifice to it. And when the other guy starts becoming a real person with different dimensions, who is a real pain in the ass sometimes, it can be a big letdown, and you think, oh, this is all wrong. Well, he's all wrong. This is the wrong guy. And so a lot of 99 Boyfriends is about it's the search for this dream boy, but then it's kind of it's a reflection on like, okay, if and when he finds him, who is the real person? Is this person correct, or did he just meet an idealized? Did he meet like his idealized version? And is there another boy out there who maybe has been there all along, who is much better? So you're gonna get a lot of triangles, quadrangles, rhombuses. There.
Lot of geometry.
Yeah, a lot of geometry. I didn't go to school for math.
We did in math class.
So I think a lot of it is just about like it asks the ton of questions of just like you said this is what you wanted. Is this not exactly what you asked the universe for? And I think that can be something that's very, very difficult for queers to do and manifest in their lives, is because we tend to start dating later if we do date. We're coming to it with sort of adult brains and adult bodies and adult schedules, but with a middle school emotional intelligence. So it can be and even if you're maybe super hyper on top of it, you're going to be dating somebody who's not able to express themselves in a relationship very well. And you're going to have to guide them. I just think there's going to be a lot more work. And it's like, are you up for that work? Are you, and are you able to kind of view this as, is this achievable, work to do? Or is this, what is that? Like most relationships, there is a moment where it's like, is this a project guy, or is this, or is this like fixable? And I think it kind of comes down to, it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. So I think a lot of
everyone's a project. You just have to find that project you like.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, 99 Boyfriends is about 99 projects. Yeah, it's very and then the 100th is Micah himself. He himself is a project.
That makes sense.
So yeah, and so it's his whole journey of like is about kind of taking away those boxes. It's like, okay, what is fantasy, what is reality, and is there kind of a happy medium where you're still, lovers of romance can still be swept away, but also, understand real world implications and all that. So can't wait to share with everybody. Can't wait to Can't wait to get reviews that aren't like just littered with content warnings because like Surrender Your Sons, the response has been so great and everyone is like really, really great. I had content warnings. I'm such a believer in them. But sometimes I'm like, God, you think Surrender Your Sons was a pack of cigarettes with the amount of warnings people put on it. But
yeah, no,
you know, there'll be much less trauma in this one. So I'm looking very much excited to some, if not content warning free, but at least maybe some like more full-throated endorsements.
Get ready for some attempted bans too.
Yeah. Listen, that's how you know you made it. Well, Lev, I think we've solved this mystery. I think we cracked the case, Gumshoes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've solved it, folks. Toxic masculinity gone.
Amazing. So yeah, so you can get Surrender Your Sons currently wherever books are sold, and you can I don't think by the time this comes out, maybe there'll be pre-orders for 99 Boyfriends. We don't have a release date yet. It is fall 2022, but you can definitely add it on Goodreads, even though I just really shit talked Goodreads. It's great for readers. It's just authors it should just be congratulations, you signed your first deal. We are now removing your account.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea.
Yeah. You can add 99 Boyfriends on Goodreads. And Lev, why don't you plug?
Well, Camp and Jack of Hearts are both available wherever books are sold, and they're on, give them 5 stars on Goodreads or else you're a homophobe. And
if you've read our books, rate and review.
Yeah. And my next book is adult, also out fall 22, and it's called Lavender House. And you can add that. It's also super gay. And you can add that on Goodreads as well.
Fantastic. Well, it was so nice chatting with you, Lev. And we'll see you out there fall 2022 with our continued
yeah, I know. I'm sad that
takedowns of this patriarchy.
Since mine's adult, we won't be able to do as many events. We'll figure out a way.
I'm sure it's all.
I'm sure an adult mystery and a teen rom-com can get together somewhere, somehow, and just find a space for themselves.
It's all going to be the same audience. Okay. Yeah, it's the same people picking it up. But thanks everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all next year in person at Louisiana Book Festival. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for watching this presentation of the virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival. Please visit our official bookseller, Cavalier House Books, and receive 20% off all featured festival titles through the end of the year. A special thank you to our festival sponsors. The Louisiana Book Festival will return on October 29th, 2022.